Leslie, you're the pensioner elected trustee of the BBC pension scheme, and you're also a member of our committee. And you had a distinguished career in the BBC as pensions officer. What year did you join the BBC?
I joined BBC in 1979 as the assistant pensions officer, and in 1986 I was promoted to pensions manager.
Right.
And I stayed with the BBC for about 16 years.
So responsible, really, for pension policy.
That's right, pensions policy within the BBC, determining where the scheme should be going, ensuring that the scheme complied with legislation, taxation, and so on.
Now, when you joined the BBC, the pension scheme was already in existence and had been for some time. Do you know anything about the history of it? Because it's rather intriguing for our members, I'm sure, to learn, as it were, when it started.
Yes, it's interesting because the present scheme was established in 1947, and at that time it took over from a money purchase pension scheme. So when the BBC scheme was established, it was actually called the BBC New Pension Scheme.
So there was a scheme in existence already, but it was money purchase as we have today.
That's right, yes.
Full circle, yes.
Full circle. And the BBC pension scheme, when it was created, was actually a very forward-looking scheme because it provided the same level of benefits to all staff, regardless of grade or gender. And unusually for the time, it also provided dependence benefits to same-sex partners.
That's very interesting. That's extremely advanced.
It was introduced when the scheme was set up. So
That's amazing.
Whereas the scheme normally provided a widow's pension and a widower's pension as well, they also provided a discretionary dependence pension, and same-sex partners were always considered. It was a modern and forward-looking scheme at the time.
Yes. And this was set up in 1947-48. You
Yes.
say all staff, they had to contribute? It was, presumably it was, they had to contribute, the BBC contributed as well.
It was compulsory. People had to serve 1 year effectively on probation, and then after 1 year they were confirmed in their appointments.
Yeah.
And were eligible to join the pension scheme. And at that time, contributions for members was about 7.5% of salary, so it was quite high.
So in effect, if you're drawing your pension today, you're still benefiting from that scheme from 1947-48.
That's right. They're now enjoying the benefits of both the members' contributions at the time, the BBC's contributions, and also the good investment return that the scheme achieved. In fact, perhaps you might be interested to know, when I joined the scheme and the BBC, I was very fortunate because the scheme was in surplus at that time, and at every actuarial evaluation, which takes place every 3 years, the surplus had increased. And during my time as pensions manager, I managed to get a number of scheme improvements through the pensions committee. And to give you an idea of some of the improvements which we're benefiting from now, the BBC raised the widow and widower's pension from half the members' pension to 2/3 of the members' pension.
Oh, yes.
They also raised the lump sum death in service benefit from 3 times salary to 4 times salary. The guaranteed pension increase was also raised from 5%, or the RPI if less, to 10%, or the RPI if less. Although with inflation being quite low now, that guarantee hasn't actually come into effect for a few years.
No, but it really mattered in, say, the 70s or in the 90s when we had inflation really up to 15%.
Well, we actually had inflation higher than that. I remember in 1976, I think it was, inflation hit 25%.
Good
and
grief.
That is the increase that BBC pensioners received in that year.
Really? Now, that was the time, of course, when a lot of people were taking out colour licenses and so on and so forth, and the BBC was really fairly well off as far as its income was concerned, but presumably that faded away as we got into the 90s and towards the millennium.
That's right. Unfortunately, in the 90s, Gordon Brown, when he was Chancellor, changed the taxation of pension schemes, and that began to push us into a deficit. And the deficit actually continued for a number of years. and even to the current day, mainly because pensioners are living much longer than was originally expected, but also because of low interest rates at the present time.
Now, we need to remember that in the period that when you joined and I joined as well, almost everyone smoked, almost everybody drank rather a lot. I suspect that life expectancy was rather low then, relatively.
Lower than it is today. But having said that, BBC pensioners tend to live longer than the national population.
Ah,
In fact, I remember when I was at BBC, a lot of people used to say BBC pensioners only survive for 2 years after retirement. And we thought, this can't be true. We asked our actuaries to investigate this, and they found actually that BBC pensioners live longer than the national average, partly because the normal pension age was age 60, but also a lot of people retired well before 60. A lot of people were retiring in their 50s.
yes.
Because there was less stress, they tend to live longer than the national average. So we have some very, very old pensioners.
That's very interesting. Do we know how old our oldest pensioner is, as a matter of interest?
No, I haven't got that information at the moment. But I do remember when I was at the BBC, we had one pensioner who had reached, I think, 102. And it was decided, or they were considering inviting him in for a special meal with the DG, but then they thought, maybe not, it might be too much for him. But at that time, there was, as I said, he was 102. And I think we've probably got quite a few people now who are over their 100th birthday.
Yes. What actually happened in terms of meeting the staff? Did you actually face-to-face meet the staff to discuss their pension future, or did you leave it to the personnel officers to introduce it if they thought it was important? Presumably it's the sort of thing most people just took for granted.
I know the experience I had with personnel or HR or people managers, as they are now called, personnel managers just didn't understand the pension scheme. And in fact, I remember when I joined the BBC, my personnel manager gave me a copy of the pension scheme booklet and said, you probably know more about this than I do. And I found that personnel actually stayed away from pensions. They relied on the written communication. Part of my job, though, was to actually counsel people when they approached retirement or if they had problems. So I had a lot of face-to-face meetings with individual pensioners. I also spoke at the pre-retirement seminars to explain the pension scheme and the retirement options available. There was a retirement conference at least once a month. And I remember speaking in the Langham, and what was then the BBC Club, to about 100 people. And that was quite a shock for me because I'd never had public speaking in front of such a large number of people.
Now, when people joined, some of them brought pensions or were able to bring pensions with them. Maybe they'd been teaching or something like that beforehand. So someone must have given them advice about absorbing earlier pension contributions into the BBC scheme.
Unfortunately, there was no communication from our department to members when they joined the BBC. The only contact they had was through their personnel manager and literature which was provided by the pension scheme. So the communications we had did actually say that people could transfer their benefits in previous schemes into the BBC pension scheme and in return receive a period of pensionable service as if it were all BBC service.
Yes, well, I remember doing that myself, but I must have been advised by my personnel officer because I don't remember meeting the pensions officer. I remember getting emails, or what it would have been memos in those days, yes. Carbon copies of memos from you. So you did communicate with person, in person with people at that time, but it was largely the personnel officers who dealt with almost all aspects of welfare.
It was, yes. Although I remember as times moved on, we were actually told in pensions, look, it's not really our job to deal with the individuals. It's they have to rely on the written communication. And I know when I left, it was actually very difficult for members of staff to talk to someone experienced in pensions.
Right. Now, historically, of course, we had things like the Maxwell affair, and companies were milking their own pension schemes and so on and so forth. What was the result in the BBC of the Maxwell incident? Do you remember?
There's a lot of uncertainty amongst members and wondering whether the BBC was affected. Could the BBC dip its hand in the till of the pension scheme or not? And in fact, the BBC never did. There's a common misconception that the BBC actually took a refund of contributions, which is completely wrong. BBC never took a refund of contributions. They never took a contribution holiday. What they did do, and again, this is when there was a surplus in the scheme, they did reduce their contributions, but they never reduced their contributions to below what members were paying. They never reduced their contributions below 4%. And in fact, the BBC had to get rid of some of that surplus. Legislation was introduced because most pension funds had very, very large surpluses, and employers were putting money into the pension scheme to avoid taxation. So they introduced legislation that if the surplus was more than 5% of the liabilities, then either they had to reduce that surplus or they would be taxed on it.
Oh.
And by reducing surplus, either improving benefits or taking a refund of contributions. So BBC improved benefits, they reduced their contributions to the same level as employees, who incidentally are now paying 7.5% again.
Yes, full circle,
So
and we've got a money purchase scheme for new employees.
Yes, for people who joined after 2011, they have to join the new money purchase scheme.
Yeah. Now, when you came into the BBC, had you been working in the pensions business, as it were?
Yes, I came in at the young age of 27. But I'd been working for a number of years for a few insurance companies in their pensions departments. And I had qualified both as a... Hang on, let's have a look. It was I qualified in insurance and I qualified in pensions. And whilst I was with the BBC, I completed a further qualification in pensions. So most of my life has been working in pensions. Even when I left the BBC, I joined the BT, their pensions policy manager. So again, most of my life has been in pensions.
And do you think the quality of the investments has improved? I mean, we take investments extremely seriously these days, particularly as you no longer have large surpluses. And in fact, we've got a deficit. But do you think the general professionalism of the people running the scheme has improved?
Very much so. It is very much a professional organisation. The investments are managed in-house, but they use external managers. The value of the scheme at the moment is just under £20 billion. And I think about a year ago, it was something like 14 or 15 billion pounds. So at times when a lot of other pension schemes are finding it difficult to make a decent return, the BBC pension scheme has had a tremendous period of investment returns. In my capacity as trustee, I receive periodic reports from our investment managers. And for the last 3 years, I think I've been receiving reports saying, well, we've had another bumper 3 months. Our funds have gone up by so much, but don't take this as happening in the future. We're going to come to a stage where they'll start reducing. But
And of course,
they're still going up.
Yes, and of course you haven't had to pay large inflationary increases because the RPI has been relatively low.
That's right.
And may go on being like that.
Although inflation is low, our investments are measured against interest rates and inflation. So inflation is not good for the pension scheme either.
Ah, I see. One tends to think it's just good for the pensioners. When you joined the BBC, though, where did you work?
I first worked in 33 Cavendish Square, and for me it was quite interesting because I was in the heart of the West End with Oxford Street. Marvellous place to work.
Yes. and very close to BH and so on. And there were a lot of BBC buildings around that area. In fact, I mean, we owned the Langham at that time, and 33 Cavendish Square and so on. And I think other buildings, a lot of 5 Portland Place and that sort of area.
We owned 2 Cavendish Square and 4 Cavendish Square.
Yeah.
And in 2 Cavendish Square was the Pensions Administration, which is now in Cardiff. They moved while I was there, so it probably was around 1990, maybe.
Yeah. Why was it that you didn't move to Cardiff?
Well, I was part of HR, and the administration was part of finance. And the BBC had to reduce their numbers, and they decided to move the Pensions Administration under the pension scheme, so they were able to reduce numbers for the BBC. And also it was a time when BBC tried to show they weren't London-centric.
Yes.
And so it was convenient to move to Cardiff.
Yes, I see. What was your impression of the BBC when you came in? I mean, you were presumably closer to radio, to the sort of radio production people, than to television.
No. Surprisingly, I had exposure to both radio and television, but only through people who came to me for counselling.
Right.
Or if I was invited to talk to a group of members, a group of employees about their pension, or if they were looking at a redundancy situation and I was talking to a group of employees.
Yes.
But for me, I was a pensions person who just happened to be working in a broadcasting organisation. But having said that, it was actually a very exciting time for me because I was able to go to Television Centre, look at the studios, see programmes being made. I was able to go to Broadcasting House, going to the council chamber. No, it was quite exciting. If I can mention one thing which I noticed, perhaps when I left the BBC rather than when I joined it, and that was BBC people are very, very polite and gentlemanly. They love the BBC.
Yes.
They may have had difficulties at the BBC, but they still love the organisation. They love the job they're doing. In fact, I remember once I went to Television Centre with some friends, and I wanted to show them around. And we went into one of the areas which said authorised persons only, and a sound engineer came out and said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I explained what I was doing, showing people around. He said, "Oh, come inside, let me show you what I'm doing." And I found this with most people within the BBC, they're very, very happy to show you what they're doing.
Yes.
And
as long as you ask them.
Yes, yes. The people are very, very nice people to work with.
I think we do. I think we'd like to agree with that. But now you've left, you've come back to us and joined the association, as well as being the pensioner-elected trustee. Compare the BBC scheme with the other schemes you've been dealing with. Okay. How good is it?
Okay, let me give you an example. When I was interviewed for my job at BT, this is after I left BBC, I was asked a similar question. I was asked, well, presumably you've read our handbook. What do you think about our scheme and the quality of our scheme? And my reply was, and particularly in comparison to the BBC scheme, my reply was, well, the BT scheme is a good average scheme, but the BBC pension scheme is an excellent scheme. The benefits were similar. They both had retirement age of 60. They both had pension building up at 1/60th of final salary for each year of service. The death benefits were better. The pension increases were better. The early retirement discounts were better. One of the features which many people don't appreciate with regard to the BBC pension scheme is that when a member commutes or exchanges part of their pension for a tax-free cash sum, the widow's pension and pension increases are based on the full pension before cash has been taken. And there are very, very few schemes that do that.
That's very interesting. Now, the scheme is administered, well, I'm not talking about day-to-day administration, but in terms of the trustees. I mean, the trustees come partly from the BBC, partly, in your case, from the pensioner community.
So external
some
trustees.
from the union, some from the unions, and the external trustees. Do you think they're now having to be much more professional than they were? After all, they weren't professional pension people when they became trustees. They're appointed, but they presumably have to learn what to do.
Well, when they're appointed, they do have meetings with the scheme actuary and with the legal advisors. They are able to go on courses. The trustees we have at the moment, let's have a look. We have 11 trustees, an independent chairman who is a trustee of a number of other schemes, but she has a background of investment. We have 4 other trustees who are independent, mainly with investment experience. We have 3 union-supported trustees who are very, very good. They really do take an impartial view. The external trustees are professional. They normally have investment expertise and they are on other trustee boards. It is a very professional trustee board, perhaps
Much more so
than
than it
other
was.
companies.
Yes.
Much more than it was before, yes.
Now, I mean, let's end by just thinking about where we're going with pensions generally. I mean, not necessarily being specific about the BBC scheme, but do you think pensions in general are secure for the majority of the population?
I think I'd like to divide that into 2 categories. Those people who are in a final salary scheme, like the BBC pension scheme, and those who are in a money purchase pension scheme. With regard to those who are in a final salary scheme, there is a certain amount of protection. Now, most schemes at the moment are in deficit. Employers have to put more money in, and they're still in deficit, and the same with the BBC.
Yeah.
There are a large number of schemes whose employers have actually gone bankrupt. We just need to think of Arcadia, the British Home Stores Group.
Yeah.
If there's not sufficient money in the pension fund when a scheme winds up, then the liabilities are transferred to the Pension Protection Fund, which is a government-run scheme, and members do get a large proportion of their pensions paid. May not be 100%, but they get a large proportion.
So there is a safety net there, which means, of course, the government generally is taking more interest in pensions policy, isn't it? And do you think government ministers really understand pensions?
No. The pensions minister is there for 2 or 3 years and then moves on. And pensions is very, very complicated. There was only one pensions minister that was there for quite a number of years, and that was Steve Webb. When he left, he actually joined a pension company. So he was knowledgeable on pensions, and we benefited from his expertise. The current pensions minister, I think, is very good. Hasn't been in the job as long, but he's doing a good job. There is legislation coming along. The aim is to protect pensioners and members' pensions.
Yeah.
If I can throw in a point here, I mentioned that the BBC pension scheme has assets of about 20 billion at the moment. It is about 90% funded.
Yeah.
Together with additional contributions from the BBC, the trustees plan the scheme to be fully funded by 2028, which just happens to be when the licence expires and the Royal Charter expires. So we want to be fully funded by that time, which means the trustees are asking the BBC for more money to make sure we are fully funded by then. Can I throw in, I mentioned the 2 types of scheme, the defined benefit scheme, which, if I can mention, there are very, very few open schemes at the moment. Most employers are closing their final salary scheme, not only to future members, but also to future accrual of benefit for existing members. Thank goodness the BBC pension scheme is not in that situation at the moment. It may happen in the future. We don't know. If I can mention the other type of pension scheme, which is the money purchase type of pension scheme, a lot of people are going to end up with very, very small pensions. Employers are contributing less. Employees are contributing less. And in fact, a lot of young and middle-aged people now will not be able to afford to retire because their investments in their pension fund has probably fallen over the last few years, and they will have to continue working because they won't be able to afford to retire. which will be a serious problem in the coming years.
Yes.
But fortunately, BBC is not in that situation. We're in a final salary pension scheme, so we are very, very fortunate, which has
Absolutely.
good benefits.
Good. Well, that's an extremely optimistic point on which I think we could probably end, Leslie. Is there any more that you'd like to say about your time at the BBC?
Well, I think I've had a very, very enjoyable time at the BBC, not only because of the people who are there, but one sad thing I should mention is when I joined the BBC, was it in the 1970s, 1980s, and I was seeing people who were retiring. Nearly everyone was saying, BBC was great, it's not the same BBC, it's gone down.
Yeah.
16 years later, when I retired, I thought to myself, it's not the same BBC, it has deteriorated, it's gone down. And then when I saw people, after I'd retired and who were still working for the BBC, they were telling me, it's not the same BBC, it's gone down. So
It was always that, yes.
Okay, so my view of that is that in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, it must have been a really fantastic organisation to work for. I think, talking to the people now, I think it still is a very great organisation to work for.
Absolutely. But nostalgia isn't what it was.
No.
No, I think you're right. I think people working there now still think a great deal of it. But of course, it is casualised. I mean, it's huge numbers of people now on contract or working for companies that supply material to the BBC. They're not directly employed. I don't know how many employees we have at the moment.
Well, I don't know how many employees we have, but we only have about 8,000 contributing members.
Yeah.
And the BBC has recently introduced a redundancy programme. So I can imagine that number is going to fall.
Yeah.
Plus, the early retirement discounts have been slightly improved. So we may see more people either leaving on redundancy grounds or voluntarily.
Yeah.
So again, the numbers are going to get smaller.
Yes. But it may be a cold world outside if they do move.
Yes.
I think we're very fortunate.
Yes. I think we've enjoyed the BBC during the good times.
Absolutely. Well, look, Leslie, thank you very much. I think members will enjoy listening to that, find it extremely interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.